So yeah, hi, Tyrell Moodley again, yeah, and I'll be moderating with Abby and Nick. So, Nick, you introduced yourself earlier. Abby, I guess you can go next.
Hi, my name is Abhi. I'm the CTO at Polychain Capital, so I lead engineering and security for the firm. So, in my previous lives before crypto, I was a part of the founding team at two Web2 startups. I've been doing security for the past 15 years. I'm excited to be here.
Excellent. And once again, I'm Nicholas Williams. I'm the VP of software for Devio, and we have an innovative, high-speed, high-throughput blockchain.
So, from our earlier discussion, I guess we spoke a lot about Devio, but I think with Abby here, we've got an opportunity to talk about security, because that's your main topic there. That's what you work with day in and day out. We've spoken a bit about it before, and I was quite fascinated about what you had to say, and I would like to learn more about it.
Sure.
So I guess, Nick, do you have any security-related questions that you might want to ask Abby?
Well, security is very contextual, but I have a pretty rich background in security myself.
Oh, great.
So, and I've definitely heard of Polychain Capital before, but I'd like to hear more of your interesting take first.
Sure.
Then I can probably riff on that.
Yeah.
So I guess I have a bit of questions here related to security that I was trying to understand, because recently I'm involved in a crypto company, and people have asked me certain questions, and part of that 10,000 hour rule, I'm still at maybe 2,000 hours in terms of crypto, and I'm still trying to understand. I'm trying to learn as much as possible, and it's great to have two experts to pick your brains. So I'll ask you a question of chain analysis, and I know you mentioned something about not being vendor specific.
Right.
I'm not sure if this is vendor specific.
Yeah, joys of working at an RIA. So
Sorry?
Joys of working at an RIA. So, like registered investment advisors, we have a lot of compliance restrictions on what we cannot talk about private companies.
So are you able to talk about chain analysis?
Depends on the question.
Okay. So how does chain analysis ensure the accuracy and reliability of its transaction monitoring and address clustering? Can you share some real-world examples where chain analysis risk scoring has prevented significant financial crimes?
Sure, I would be able to answer the first part of the question. So mainly, like their core happens to be like they have a lot of investigations who kind of like are both have their one foot in cyber domain and one foot in the crypto domain, right? So they kind of like curate a lot of threat intel feeds working with a bunch of other providers, and they have a very good way of kind of like figuring out like how the funds are moving between different addresses, right? So it kind of like one difficult, or one place where this becomes like very difficult is that with crypto, with a single public key private key, you'll be able to generate infinite number of addresses. You'll be able to generate infinite number of addresses. So those infinite number of addresses mean those are infinite number of possibilities where your funds could go. So chain analysis kind of like aggregates this on the front end and kind of like provides with pooled addresses and kind of like tells you that like, hey, here is a bunch of threat intel feed that we enrich this data with, and then kind of like pass it along to different investigations, either that are run internally or with the regulators. So.
Well, if I understand correctly, on most chains, it's the case where you can kind of trace the movement of funds. You don't necessarily know where they have gone finally until after the fact, but you can tell kind of the history of where they've been. So even if you have unlimited addresses, you know that only these subset of addresses were actually used.
Right. Their tech actually goes a little bit further. So they would be able to like, what they like to call something like an unmixing. So traditionally in crypto, when we refer to mixing, so basically a bunch of your transactions get pooled together and kind of like is anonymous between two counterparties. So with chain analysis, you'd be able to like aggregate and kind of like learn and kind of like demix some of these transactions. And like one kind of like downstream effect that at least I feel chain analysis have done a great job at is that essentially the number of deep compliance partnerships that they have with centralized exchanges, that kind of like gives them a very strong edge though, right? Like the reason why I mentioned this is important is that at the end of the day, like all fund activity or all money movement within crypto still needs an off ramp. Right, so usually your centralized exchanges are that off ramp, and as long as you can safely prevent the exit, so you can broadly like mitigate some of the financial crimes that we see there. So
the detective work is still pretty much follow the money.
Right, follow the money.
Makes a lot of sense. And when you talk about exchanges, I guess there's two primary classifications of exchanges, right? There's centralized exchanges, which tend to be more of a traditional stack, and decentralized exchanges, which are, DeFi, where there's maybe a DAO or something managing it. Does the incentive structure work for both cases or only for the centralized case?
I mean, I would say it works for both the cases, and especially what we have seen on the field is that there are a lot of, for example, if let's say if an attacker is actively draining funds from a given contract, that is a important event both for the community and for the DAO to actually prevent as much as you can, right? And of course there is an argument to be made that like on essentially on like decentralization versus censorship, where you want to be on the slider. But in most of the cases when a particular attack kind of like becomes existential for a protocol, so usually I've seen that the DAOs and the open source community, especially on the decentralized exchanges, kind of like rally together and kind of like block some of the transactions, in the sense that, for example, if an attacker wants to use a liquidity pool and kind of like convert the stolen funds to USDC, there are ways to add certain hooks to prevent specific transfers. So that has seen like a good amount of success in out in the field.
Are those hooks often in the form of just like banning certain addresses from using the liquidity pool?
Right.
That makes
So
sense.
Uniswap V4 provides you with transaction hooks that you can say like, hey, I want like my liquidity pool only through like KYC sanction entities. So some of that kind of like provides the safety parameters that centralized exchanges provide onto the DeFi world. So
Interesting.
Okay. So the next question I'm going to ask is about elliptic faces. Are you familiar with elliptic faces?
it's a company vendor.
It's
Faces like FA, or
FAC.
faces like phase.
Faces
Oh.
like a face.
No.
Elliptics, risk management. It sounds like more of a vendor. So these are some of the questions that I've been asked, and so
I can riff on that a little bit, because I mean, elliptic makes me think like elliptic curves, right?
Right.
Which is the basis for the digital signature algorithms that are dominant today.
Yeah.
And I think, at least from my point of view, all indications are at some time, maybe not for another 10, 20 years, but at some point, quantum computing is going to change that paradigm. And so you will need different algorithms than are dominant today. I think, in my opinion, they'd probably still have a structure of asymmetric keys, where you have a public key and a private key, but the structure of those keys themselves and the algorithm of how you use them might be different. What are your thoughts on that?
Right. I still feel like post-quantum cryptography is still the holy grail of cryptography, like
Oh,
one
yeah.
of the holy grails of cryptography. So I think like there are a few protocols who are kind of like looking at it from a post-quantum world, but I wouldn't say that we're broadly there, both in
Oh,
terms
yeah,
of the
definitely not.
capabilities that attackers could use. Say, for example, if you actually would need a 256 qubit computer, which I don't.
Right, exactly.
So-
Although if QC follows Moore's law the same
Right.
way that binary computers are, that means the size of your memory roughly doubles every 18 months. That gives us like 5 to 7 years, I think, till
Yeah.
there's quantum computers available of that size.
Yeah.
that's an excellent point you just made, and I
But
guess
that's an assumption, right? I think we have yet to see if QC follows Moore's law.
this
yeah.
will lead me to my next question on quantum computing.
Mm-hmm.
You say we have up to 5 years until it disrupts.
If it doubles, I mean, roughly speaking, if
Yeah.
the size of a coherent quantum computer grows at the same rate that transistor density did in the 20th century and classical computers, I guess, then yeah, it's like 5 or 10 years.
And what will that do to the industry?
So we could both probably answer. I'd say so. Hashing algorithms, I don't think will be very effective, just because of their nature as kind of string manipulators and just the way they map the domain, just the way those functions work. I don't think they'll be very affected. What may be affected more is digital signature algorithms. So that's an important distinction to make. And it's a very technical distinction. The important part is that a lot of blockchains especially would have to fork and restructure, and every address would have to take on the new structure, because if you fail to do that, you're going to be vulnerable to those attacks. I don't know, what do
Right.
you think? Yeah, it's
So-
kind of speculative at this
Yeah.
point.
Yeah, and also like, if we assume that there is a quantum computer that could break asymmetric cryptography, then the fundamental premise that you cannot derive a private key directly from public key is kind of like compromised, right? So essentially, it would end up breaking asymmetric cryptography. So
Yeah, and a lot of other things would be
A lot of other
affected
things,
too, like
absolutely.
SSL. Like almost every digital security that exists today depends on this. So it's much bigger even than just than the blockchain.
I would say a TLDR would be like, post quantum cryptography is not only crypto or blockchain's problem. It's
Yeah,
everybody's
it's an
problem.
information system problem in general. But I don't think, at least from my point of view and everything I know, I don't suspect it will break asymmetric cryptography in general. I think it may impact specific implementations of digital signature algorithms. And most of the big chains use the same algorithms today. And so it means that your key is a certain size. One way to kind of push that horizon off is just switch to bigger keys, right? But that also involves a lot of retooling. So that's not necessarily super simple.
This seems like a big problem if because I live in Kitchener Waterloo with the Perimeter Institute where quantum computing is at its finest. I think it's one of the best institutions in the world for quantum computing. From my understanding, talking to some of the physicists there, that we're not too far away from this future. So, if this happened next year, what would this do to the entire crypto landscape?
It's hard for me to imagine some kind of overnight sudden cataclysmic event. I think it'll be more slow and insidious.
I mean, we have ChatGPT helping.
True. Although, I don't know, LLMs are the whole own interesting thing that I could get into. But,
Well, let's get into it.
Well, let me wrap up quantum
Yeah.
computing first. Quantum computing, even if it happens suddenly, I think it would be first by large nation states, so like China, the U.S.,
Russia.
Russia, groups like that. They are going to have incentives not to reveal their hands and not to do anything too, dramatic all of a sudden. When it really gets dangerous is when it gets to a point when anyone could access a big enough quantum computer to do these kind of things, and that's probably additional time. So, I wouldn't doubt that like research labs and government agencies are very close to this or have it already even, but they're probably not going to utilize it because it would be too disruptive.
Right. So, what type of things could a quantum computer do to a blockchain?
It could help figure out from the a signature of a hash what the key was. So basically, the way asymmetric computing or asymmetric cryptography works is you're doing this really hard factorization problem on the elliptical curve, and they create the curve in this special space of like just primes or just binary numbers, and you have two parts to the key, and one part's public and the other part's private. If you know the public key, which you need to know one way or another to validate the message, then the idea is it's extremely hard to figure out the private key even with that knowledge. But with quantum computing and enough evidence from existing signatures and stuff, you could essentially defuzz that, and much faster than, you couldn't do it with brute force. But with a quantum system, it can basically cohere on what that actual key likely is. So that's kind of a layman's term, a way to explain it. So you could basically gain the ability to pretend like you're someone else in that context, but not just in blockchain, in transport layer security in general.
So, man-in-the-middle attacks.
Yep.
Okay.
So,
Yep.
And also, like what essentially a quantum computer enables is, to add to your point, so it basically prevents, or it basically makes running brute force attack extremely cheap and extremely fast, right? So today, a lot of security is hinging on the fact that it's going to take like millions of years for you to like break a key, but with quantum computing, that exponentially reduces and provides attacker with much sophisticated tools than they currently have today. So that is the black swan event in my mind for not just again.
I agree,
crypto,
and
but
I
everybody
suspect.
else. So,
I don't know if it'll happen in the next 5 or 10 years. I think it will happen sometime this century. That's a
And-
prediction of mine.
And again, regarding blockchain and cryptocurrencies, what effect would that have on an entire economy?
It depends on the chain and how much it can adapt to a new paradigm. So in the case of Devio, for example, we've prepared for this by making our signature algorithms modular. So if a particular shard wants to use a different signature algorithm, you just implement it and you pop that in. As long as it follows the structure of asymmetric encryption in general, you can just pop in another implementation that uses circuits or fuzzing or was it like decoherence to avoid the quantum attack.
So Devio is ready for quantum computing.
It depends how quickly it gets unleashed, but we can adapt to it quickly and with less disruption than a lot of, I think, more unified chains, I'll say.
Right, and also like my optimistic take on this is that in my mind it's going to be more of a self-solving problem, because when there are like billions of dollars which are kind of like could be compromised, there is already enough push for all the protocols to actually have a post-quantum roadmap in terms of how they want to upgrade and how they want to change. So
Yep. Yeah, I think the main challenge is that upgrade process will require action from every key holder.
Right.
And if you fail to take action, you may be vulnerable. I mean, you likely are vulnerable. Yeah, whoever has those keys.
Okay. Well, I guess pivoting to ChatGPT, you were about to tell us something fascinating.
Oh, yeah. Well, so, yes, I think something a lot of people don't understand about the current iteration of AI and, LLM especially, right? It's large language models. So they're trained on a corpus of language. And that comes from the internet. It comes from, just big collections of human text. And so I feel like people get this sense that because it can do predictive and generative things that aren't in the corpus it was given, you can train it on X and it can do Y, but it's still based on X. And so I guess my insight to share with everybody is that LLMs are really telling us things about the structure of our language more than they're telling us stuff about reality. And so that's really important to understand. If, some people philosophically are symbolists in the sense that they think all of mind and everything about information processing is nothing more than moving around symbols. And if that's true, then LLMs might be very powerful. They might actually be a pathway to AGI. I'm highly skeptical of that position. I think you can make an argument, a materialist argument, that even based on the way the physical world is, there is something more to mental processing and ideation and how rationality works than simply symbol processing.
So
And
you disagree
LLMs
with Jeffrey Hinton?
Yeah, I disagree with a lot of loud people on that. So I don't think we're actually on a path to AGI this way. I think we're going to hit roadblocks. And a similar path happened kind of in the 70s that most people don't know about, where there were a lot of breakthroughs in AI. People thought, we were going to hit a singularity quickly. And then it turned out that it didn't keep growing the way they expected. And I would not be surprised if that happens again.
Okay. Well,
But, if it does, that'll be amazing technology.
I guess getting back onto the crypto topic.
Yeah.
If we're going down this rabbit hole, we can continue doing that.
Lots of rabbit holes go down. Yeah.
But where do you think crypto is going to be in the next 5 to 10 years within the payments sector globally? Like, do you think crypto is going to be something that most governments will adopt? We've seen stuff like CBDCs and other stable coins coming into effect, like USDC and USDT. To me, it looks like these stable coins is something that I think even the U.S. government has sort of given the green light. PayPal has done their stable coin as well. Is this something that governments are going to adopt on a larger scale? What do you guys take on that?
That's an excellent question. I think there's a lot of different angles to it. I think governments will adopt cryptocurrency more for cross-border settlement, just because it's relatively auditable and and manageable compared to traditional methods. I'm not sure how much we'll see it toward the consumer in that time frame. But I do think large organizations, governments especially, will use it more, and I think they'll use it as a hedge for what do you call it? Just the assets that governments hold, like wealth funds, sovereign wealth funds, and things like that. I think more governments probably will do things like El Salvador has done and hold a large amount of crypto just as a hedge against fiat currency, especially if we see more inflation in that time frame.
Yeah, yeah, I kind of like tend to agree that like usually stablecoins, like one of the common use cases that most people talk about is having like fast payments, and I largely believe that is more of a U.S. problem than the rest of the world problem. But where I'm most hopeful about stablecoins is that like properly collateralized backed stablecoins, you can actually use those trust primitives to build much better financial rails, right? Say, for example, you can build like much stronger financial products, which has better capital efficiency, and you kind of like get the two best properties of crypto, right? Basically, the transparency and the decentralization. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and even I think the well-established chains today work well in that case, where it's kind of large-scale, regular settlements that are somewhat predictable.
Right.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. I think the speed of the transactions is something that governments, the traceability, being able to see where those funds are coming from, because people tend to think that only criminals use cryptocurrency, but if you look at physical fiat, like that's the easiest way for criminals to deal, right? I could just hand you $1,000,
Oh yeah,
and that's it. But with stable coins, it's it's possible to use tools like chain analysis, right, to follow the money, right? So would you say that cryptocurrency is actually a better way of monitoring transactions than fiat?
I would definitely agree, mainly for two reasons. One is essentially the having a transparent, publicly auditable ledger of all the transactions, and where you cannot go back in history and change things, right? Like having an append-only ledger is the feat killer app in my mind, right? And also like another place where I feel it'll be like mostly used is essentially around how we kind of like categorize specific payments, right? This is just my personal opinion. I fundamentally believe that like we should design protocols in such a way that like no honest user is harmed, but the privacy miscreants have enough forensic data for them to like hand it to like law officers, right? Like some people may argue like you're actually compromising on censorship resistance, but we all follow rules, right? Like, so the point that I'm trying to make is that we want to optimize for the common case where predominantly the most volume in crypto is actually people who want a more equitable financial system and a faster system than they're currently exposed to, right? So for all of their honest use cases, there are predominant tools, even within crypto and like even newer tools, which allow them to like cryptographically prove that like, hey, I followed the word of the law. Right. So today that does not exist in fiat, mainly because fiat is not actually programmable unless you build a bunch of additional centralized checks and balances there. So,
yeah, I absolutely agree with that. I mean, I think I said in the earlier talk, a blockchain really is a chain of evidence at the end of the day. So it's absolutely more traceable and auditable than fiat cash. I mean, the fact that fiat cash physically exists makes it very hard to track. Like you said, you just hand it to someone and that's it.
It's done.
Yeah, keep and hide it all kinds of ways. Yeah.
right. Sorry, and also like one other problem with fiat is that like it kind of like has a asymptotic curve on how much you can fractionalize that, right? Say for example, people would like paying like a few cents here as it really doesn't make any sense, but in a lot of places outside of US, that is actually significant enough of money for people to track, right? And today you can no longer divide a dollar more than a cent, but with crypto or with having stable coins, that's like the first class citizen of the token itself. So
Definitely. And just to echo that, yeah, most, I think the standard, based on Ethereum is 10 to the minus 16.
Right. 16.
So yeah, that's, compared to the dollar, you get a penny is 1/100th of a dollar. In most crypto, you can break it down to, 10 to the 16 power. So it's 16 decimals. So even if the value of crypto changes dramatically compared to fiat, it'll still have that liquidity.
That's interesting. Well, I think we've spoken a lot about security. Yeah? Maybe there's someone in the audience that has a question. No?
Let's speculate a little bit.
Mhm.
You guys are talking about QC and stuff. Do you guys think the traditional computer has started reaching the plateau? Like transistor density and stuff. You guys were talking about Moore's law and stuff. Just for the sake of
Mhm.
fun, let's talk about, are we starting to hit a limit with traditional computers?
I absolutely don't think so. A few years ago, maybe I could have been convinced by that, but recently, with the dominance of Nvidia in the stock market, for example, I dug into what they're doing. I mean, they're coming out with chips that are more powerful, more efficient, less heat displacement, all at the same time.
You know what the
Um,
channel gap is right now?
I don't offhand. I'm not that
Yeah.
into the details of dies and hardware, but I know it's continuing to improve. Moore's law hasn't broken yet. It does kind of defy logic in a way that something could grow at that exponential rate, doubling every 18 months since like the 60s or something. It's been like 60 years. That's a lot of doublings. But it's still going as far as we can tell. And I don't see that changing, at least in the next 5 or 10 years. There's still a lot more they can do. I think we're still a few orders of magnitude from the like theoretical physical limits of that. And I definitely think, even as they get smaller and more integrated into things, classical computing is still going to be everywhere. Unless there's some kind of breakthrough in superconductors or something like that, like everyone thought last year for a little while, quantum computers are going to be in data centers, very isolated. They cannot be disturbed by noise. They need to be near absolute zero. They are very sensitive, and I don't think that is going to change anytime soon.
Right, and I also just to add to that, I kind of feel that even if we were, for argument's sake, even if we were to hit like actual physics limits on how small you can pack a transistor, even if there are like no more improvements in channel width, a lot of scaling will eventually move to software. So in my mind, software has kind of like lagged the scaling industry because of Moore's law, because you have like faster and faster chips available. It's like somebody else's problem. But when we do hit that limit, like all of the scaling issues are going to come back from your entire software SDK, right? All the way from like your compilers to system software to application. So I feel there's a lot of scaling wins there as well in terms of like how parallelly we could design an application, because for the end user, the fastest that they could get their request processed is not is as much dependent on having a fast chip as opposed to as like having a strong enough application design principles where you can allow that sort of parallelization and consolidation for the end users. So.
Yeah, I have to echo that. Like, as probably a lot of you in this room know, anyone who's developed software for decades now, like, software is not more efficient now than it was like 20 years ago. There's so much bloat. I mean, it's doing so many things and not in the most efficient way. There's not, I think, because of Moore's law, because transistor speed and RAM and space have grown so fast all at the same time, there's been very little discipline in keeping software, tightly designed and very efficient. And honestly, right now with LLMs coding and stuff, I don't, that's not going to help with that, I don't think, at least in the short run. But I think if we hit a wall, that'll suddenly become much more important again, like it was, 20, 30 years ago. Like, I mean, I can just talk more.
You
Yeah.
talk more, yeah.
I don't need questions. Like, I'll give you a whole other angle on this thing. I said earlier, it's kind of this big wave. Like, it's not, it's hard to say where crypto will be in 5 or 10 years. I think it's going to grow in fits and bursts. I think there's going to be booms and busts. I think volatility is going to continue to be high. It's kind of easier in a way to say where things will likely be in 100 years, just because there's a lot more larger, more general patterns that we can look at from history and technology to have a better idea of that. And a lot of this is part of what has been termed like the fourth industrial revolution, where the 20th century was all about scale and like how big can you make a factory. You get all these economies of scale. But right now, I think the push of the new technologies that are coming out is really for distribution. So, not just blockchain obviously is distributing data and distributing value, but on top of that, you've got solar panels distributing energy. You've got additive manufacturing, distributing the ability to manufacture things, and battery technology distributing energy storage. I think that is actually the big driving factor, and that's going to be a driving factor for this whole century in all likelihood from my perspective. We've come a long way. If you look at like the cost of solar panels, it's down like 90%, which is ridiculous. It's like even faster than Moore's law actually in the past 10 years, I think. That is going to change the economy in ways that are hard to predict right now. Because you might have in 2100 you might have a lot more microgrids because you don't need this big grid for stability. Just with your panels and your batteries. What other changes that create, right? Maybe we don't ultimately need as many wires and things as we have right now. And related to that, there's this concept I like to talk about of circular economy. And what I mean is kind of just, it is recycling and reusing things more, kind of paying more attention to the life cycle of a product even after it is done with its initial use. Blockchain technology can make that more easy to track a product. If you find it in a junkyard and it has some invisible dye on it or a QR code or something, you could scan that and potentially find the whole history of that product, what it's made of and stuff like that, and you could figure out how to reuse it. Now,
It's interesting.
people get kind of dogmatic sometimes when you mention things like that, and I'm definitely not saying that the economy will stop being extractive altogether. Like, I think we will still consume primary resources. There will still be mines and like oil and gas wells and stuff. Like, I don't see that going away overnight, even though I think there will be a lot less of it. We need a lot less of it, right, for how we're changing the atmosphere. But at the same time, we can just be so much more efficient than we are currently. I think there's so much room
So
for
touching on that, actually, I had an interesting discussion with an economist based in Zambia, and he had touched on the idea of certain countries renting out their resource. So if you look at copper, for example, today people are stealing catalytic converters from cars, right? They're stealing transformers because of the copper that's in these devices, and they're recycling that copper because copper now it just hit $10,000 a ton. They predict that copper is going to hit $50,000 a ton. So the value of copper is just going to keep on going up. But what happens when a country loses its resource because it's been mined so much, right? They can no longer mine copper because everything's gone. But with copper, you can recycle it, right? So going back to the circular economy, how easy would it be to use blockchain? You mentioned scanning the dyes within the
It depends a
copper.
lot on the material. So yeah, like with an alloy, with like copper or a metal, it's a little bit hard. I mean, you could do it in the imprint of a product, right? But once you melt down an ore, like you're going to lose anything you had to track it at that point. So it really depends on what material you're talking about. The main things people are doing this with now is like luxury goods, for example, because it has a twofold effect. It helps verify that it really is a luxury good and not a knockoff, and it helps them track it through its entire life cycle. So if there's something wrong with it and it gets repaired, it can be updated, the records for it, and then when it's finally done, they can potentially reuse those materials. But yeah, with certain metals, they're highly reusable. I'm not sure copper is as much though, because it oxidizes so much. I know aluminum is extremely reusable.
But if you look at like rare earth minerals, and you look at the metals that go into a battery, like cobalt, and, all these different.
Well,
metals.
battery technology right now is super exciting. There's all these new things coming out. There's what are they called? Like iron air batteries, where the main mineral in it is just iron and like atmosphere.
but going back to rare earth minerals, like if you look at like Apple, for example, Apple basically purchases minerals from Congolese mines, right? They claim that they
Well, so it's cobalt you're really talking about
Right,
there.
cobalt.
That's the one that slaves are mining, and that's in all of our phones right now.
Yeah, they claim that they make a conscious attempt to not use this type of metal from these particular mines. But using blockchain, you could theoretically track all of that, right? With the circular economy as well.
If it was identified somehow, and that's the trick to the tracking, right? You need some kind of on the physical item. So there's concept of digital twin. That you have a physical thing that's moving around in the world, and then you have a digital record of it. That physical thing needs some kind of identifier baked into it that you can read somehow. And so as long as you can do that, it's doable. But yeah, I mean, the situation in Congo is terrible, and I really think that. Given demographics and the nature of this technological revolution we're in now toward distribution, I'm really, hoping and praying that it is good for Africa in particular, because there's so many young people there, and there's so many possibilities with this new stuff.
I think that's where the next revolution is going to take place. Is regarding blockchain is on the continent, and hopefully we can utilize your technology to help speed
I'd love
that up.
to do that. Yeah.
I think. Any more questions?
How much time do we have?
Not sure. What time do we end?
2 minutes.
Oh, 2 minutes.
2 minutes,
Final
yeah.
thoughts?
Yeah, like for me, one of the exciting use cases of crypto and blockchain that I see is like crypto does two things really well. One is prove ownership, and two is essentially make the transactions transparent, right? So for any industry where these two are critical, that like crypto is going to be a game changer between ones who actually have a good supply chain system versus ones who do not. And to kind of like add to my point, like the supply chain problem is not, it used to be only physical goods problem, but now it is kind of like a software problem too, right? Like when you kind of like build a binary, how confident are you that you are actually building sources from the sources that you trust, right? So crypto or blockchain can fundamentally solve this to kind of like provide a sort of like a bill of materials for anything that you can think of. It could be an asset, it could be a software deployment. And we do see a lot of these use cases even in like defense procurement industries where I want to make sure that like my supply chain is not critically dependent on an adversary who's producing that part for us, right? So these kind of like identification checks like are kind of like straightforward to do with the blockchain. So.
Mm-hmm. I've got two riffs on that because I'm also very interested in supply chain management. One is that blockchain enables the ability for multi-party collaboration, like I was talking about earlier, where an industry has some local market to kind of resell inputs that they can't use. You could do that on a global scale as well, where competitors can trustlessly collaborate. And instead of each ordering 4 times the same interchangeable thing from the same factory, they consolidate those orders blindly, using smart contracts or something, so that it's more efficient for both the supplier and the recipient of that product. And secondly, on the defense procurement side, we have some interesting IP around a way to detect interdiction, where using key management, you can basically, and it involves multiple keys, some created by the supplier in the factory and some that you add kind of at initialization time when the product's received. We can detect certain ways that item might have been, man-in-the-middle attacked basically physically, because this is something that happens in the real world. The Chinese government will go to a factory and have them put certain software on chips that they know are going to the U.S. We have a way to detect that.
Wow. It's interesting. We can continue talking later on in the bar.
All right. Thank you, speakers, for your knowledge and your navigating through challenges and sharing the best alternative solutions. We really appreciate your input.